Welcome back to the PigX podcast and the second episode that's part of our niche production miniseries. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. Last week, we started off our mini-series, listening to some insights on what educational gaps there are for producers and veterinarians alike. This week, we're excited to bring you another episode in this unique mini-series. Today, we're going to be discussing if form matters in the energy versus fiber discussion, and how hay can play a role in swine production. Joining us is Dr. Lee Johnston, a professor of swine nutrition and management at the University of Minnesota. The university is home to what Dr. Johnston believes is the only certified organic swine production facility in the nation, offering a unique perspective on alternative systems and research. Throughout this conversation, we'll cover energy sources, ingredient density in diets, and how hay could fit into your feeding system. Let's start with his connection to the agricultural community.
Well, I was born on a dairy farm in western Pennsylvania and decided I didn't really want to milk cows all my life. So I got involved in college at Penn State in the swine barn there and had some really great mentors that guided me towards the swine industry. And from there, did a master's degree at Texas Tech University. And while I was there, I was assistant manager for the university's research farm and did my research and helped with other projects. And that time decided to go on for my PhD at Michigan State University. And while I was there, I spent a year or so as the assistant state swine extension specialist, as well as did my research and had the opportunity to come to the University of Minnesota out of graduate school. And I joined the faculty in animal science here in 1988 and been involved with swine extension and research and mentoring graduate students and working with farmers ever since. So it's been a good run.
So out of curiosity, why did you make the jump from dairy to the swine industry?
I didn't like to milk cows. I liked everything else about the farm, but I didn't like milking. And at Penn State, when I went, I heard they hired students in the barns. And so I went to all the barns and put in my application. And just so happens the swine guy called me first. And he said, well, we have some hours, not sure you'll work out. You got no experience. So we'll split the hours between you and another guy that had no experience. And turns out we both worked there for 3 years till we graduated and ended up in the swine industry. And so I was excited, particularly when I was on the judging team, about how fast things change in the swine industry and genetic improvements. And it was all new to me. So it was exciting to go into the swine world and have enjoyed it ever since.
I love that connection. So Lee, as you think then a little bit more about some of the research and focus from your career, let's dive into that research a bit more. What has been some of those high-level opportunities and areas of focus? Can you give us a high-level overview?
Well, I've been enjoyed research in sows. When I was in graduate school, I was torn between studying reproductive physiology and nutrition. I didn't know which one to really focus on, and it turns out that in that time that the reproductive physiologists weren't really getting jobs and the nutritionists were being snapped up. So I thought if I could study nutrition in sows, I could kind of marry the two disciplines, and that's a big reason why I came to Minnesota on the faculty. Is Minnesota has been known over the years from my predecessors of a large sow herd in the university to do research with and do sow work. And I got to work with people like Jim Pettigrew and Ron Moser and Steve Cornelius when I came. And so it was a natural fit for my interests. And I'm housed at the West Central Research and Outreach Center out in western Minnesota. And as a result of that posting, I ended up getting involved in a lot of different swine projects because we're a satellite herd and a place to do research. So faculty from campus and other places bring projects. So I get involved in some nursery stuff and housing and engineering and a variety of things. So it's sometimes been difficult to focus, but it's also been fun dabbling in a lot of different areas and seeing things from different perspectives. So, yeah, that's what's kind of kept me busy and excited.
So, what are some nutritional concepts you have been talking to producers about in regards to alternative systems?
Sometimes I think producers have this feeling that if they raise pigs outdoors, or they raise pigs in hoop barns or something, or on straw, that somehow their nutrition and they're different than confinement hogs. And there are some differences, yes, but the differences are around the environment and the goals of the operation. And the biology of the pig is the same, whether he's on a straw-based pack outside or whether he's in a state-of-the-art, deep-pitted, tunnel-ventilated confinement barn. So, um, from energy versus fiber kind of thing is basically we think about energy sources in a diet. You have fats, you have carbohydrates, and you have proteins, which are mostly the ingredient or the components of the diet to provide energy. And and if we say carbohydrates, carbohydrates primarily is starch or fiber are the two general classes of carbohydrates. And in most pig diets, we count on the starch in the corn, the starch in the corn, that's the energy. If we value that at one, if we add fat to the diet, fat has 2.25 times more energy per unit weight than starch. So if we want to increase the energy density of a diet or increase the calorie intake of pig, we add fat to the diet. Well, on the flip side, if we wanted to dilute the energy or reduce the amount of energy density, then we can add fiber because fiber has a much lower energy content. We could also use protein to provide energy, but that's very expensive because the energy value of protein is about the same as carbohydrates after you strip off the nitrogen and process it in the pig. So, um, if we're using protein in the diet as an energy source, that's very expensive, and we try not to do that. So, so basically, when we talk about energy, if we add fiber to the diet, we're decreasing the energy density, and there might be reasons to do that. Or if we add fat to the diet, we're increasing energy density. So, by example, if we take just corn, and if you look at the book value of corn, corn has about 1,540 kilocalories of metabolizable energy. That's just a way to measure the energy per pound of corn. Well, if we strip the starch out of it, strip the protein out of it, and end up with the fiber and just look at corn bran, which is basically the fiber portion of corn, that energy density is 1,170 kilocalories. So about a 25% reduction going from the whole grain to just the fiber. If we looked at wheat, similar picture, you get about a 27% reduction in energy concentration if we compare wheat bran, the fiber portion of wheat, to wheat grain. So anytime we add fiber to the diet, we're going to dilute the energy, we're going to decrease the energy concentration. So every mouthful of feed that the pig eats, he's going to get less calories compared to a diet without fiber in it or lower fiber.
And just to clarify here, what do you mean by the term energy density?
So energy density basically is you have, let's just say you have a pound of feed. If it's a real energy dense, there's more calories in that pound than if it was an energy dilute diet. There's less calories. So every mouthful of feed, an energy dense diet, they're getting more calories than in an energy dilute diet.
So, when you're thinking about nutritional management for folks in the swine industry, let's unpack a little bit more about what it means when you say pigs eating to meet energy needs.
Yeah, pigs basically have an energy requirement on a daily basis. It's influenced by a lot of different factors, their growth rate, their age, their environment, their body size, a variety of things. But they have this set number that they've got to eat every day. And the pig will he does a pretty good job of eating to satisfy that daily energy requirement. So if we take and we add, let's say that number is 6,000 calories. I just pull it out of the air. So if the pig has to eat 6,000 kilocalories a day, and you feed him a diet that has 1,000 kilocalories per pound, they're going to have to eat about 6 pounds a day to get their their energy requirement. If we add fat to the diet, that makes the energy density of the diet higher. So every mouthful of feed, he gets more calories. We add fat to the diet, he won't have to eat 6 pounds. He'll probably eat 5 pounds or 5 1/4 or something like that, depending on how much fat you put in, to get to his 6,000 calorie limit or target. On the flip side, if we add fiber, which dilutes out the energy, he's going to have to eat more than 6 pounds to get his 6,000 calories. And he can do that. He'll eat more feed, but at some point, he's got a limitation called gut fill. His gut, his stomach, his intestines, so forth, is only so big, and he can only eat so much. So a little bit like Thanksgiving dinner, and you sit down and you stuff yourself, you're uncomfortable, you just can't put any more in. And if the energy density is so low because of all the fiber in the diet, he can't eat more, then he won't meet his 6,000 kilocalorie daily target. And so that's when you're going to see some decreased performance, some slower gains, certainly lower feed efficiency, feed conversion efficiency, because it takes more pounds of feed to get to the daily energy requirement and the targeted growth rate that he's got programmed in. So the pig can adjust his intake to meet his energy needs within reason, but at some point there's a limitation that he can't overcome.
A very, very economical impact as well, like you're mentioning there with conversion and things too. What about age of the pig? You mentioned that that also has an impact on digestion, energy, etc.
Well, older pigs, and when we talk about fibrous diets, higher fiber content, we say high fiber, we're talking about something other than a corn, meal base. So high fiber diets, older pigs can handle them better than younger pigs. So if we think of basically an old sow, she's the best at digesting fiber. She's got their big hind gut, her big cecum, large intestine, and that is where all the microbes are that help break down that fiber. They can absorb short chain fatty acids from that fermentation. So it's almost like a little mini rumen or at the back of the pig. That works pretty well in old sows, but the younger you get, the less developed that is. So a butcher hog ready for market is going to handle a high fiber diet better than a newly weaned pig, because the newly weaned pig just doesn't have the adaptation to the fiber, doesn't have the well-developed hind gut, and cannot digest the fiber as well as the older pig. So using high fiber diets depends a little bit on the stage and when you want to do it, and the economics of it, of course, are important, because if you have a high fiber diet, they're going to eat more feed. And so maybe your daily feed costs are going to go up, but maybe they don't if the fiber is sourced and that diet is so cheap that you can counteract that higher intake.
So then when you think about ground versus baled hay, and then I'm wrapping my mind around the energy versus fiber, does ground versus baled hay matter for that energy density as we were talking about earlier?
Not really. The hay that we have is the hay that we have. All hay isn't equal, of course. We can have some pre-bloom, fine stemmed alfalfa is pretty high quality stuff versus some old, mature, fully headed out Timothy. And the nutrient profiles of those two are very different. There's really not a lot of data for growing pigs in particular on the nutritional value of those different qualities of hay. Um, I think the bigger thing lies around um, how you're going to feed it and how the pigs are going to consume it. For instance, if we're in an outdoor setting and we've got a lot of we've got young pigs and we don't have really control of the feeding environment, ground hay just put out there is probably going to blow away. So you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. We know pretty much if the pig doesn't eat it, he doesn't get any nutritional value out of it. Um, on the flip side, if it's an old mature hay, maybe they'll just eat the leaves and do some sorting and leave a bunch of stems and not get the whole value out of it. So then if we grind it and we mix it in a complete diet, then we can maybe get the pig to eat everything and not waste a portion of the hay. Um, Pigs will eat that hay and chomp on it, and but it's not a very energy dense ingredient, and so it's likely to slow the pigs down relative to what they could grow at a rate. But again, depending on the production system, that may be desirable or maybe not.
How does hay fit in the feeding system?
Well, it again depends on your equipment and so forth. If you're going to have ground hay, um, the nice thing about ground hay is you can grind it reasonably fine and get it to mix into complete grain protein supplement kind of diets, a corn soy or a barley canola or something like that. The ground hay probably forces the pig to eat pretty much everything. They can still do some sorting, but um, and if it's an indoor system where they're not really exposed or the feeders and that are out of the wind and that, it probably decreases some waste. But if you're feeding out on an outdoor feeding pad, the ground hay probably gets blown away and has more. I'm probably a little oversensitive to wind because I live on the prairies in western Minnesota and we get a lot of wind all the time. But baled hay, on the other hand, you probably don't have the wind losses, but there's there's more opportunity for the pigs to sort it and eat the parts that they want and leave the rest. Um, the advantage of baled hay too is that you don't have further processing costs. You don't have the grinding and those kind of things. So, yeah, I think there's probably not really a right or wrong answer. It's considerations to think about as you're going to apply those practices in your operation.
And so, as you're thinking about figuring out what is best for your operation, do you have any advice on where to get started?
Well, I think you need to sit there and figure out what your goals for the feeding program are and what kind of cost structure you have, though, so that, if we're really trying to push pigs and get them through, I wouldn't be feeding hay at all. But if there are some other, opportunities to get some high quality alfalfa hay and you can grind it, could be a pretty good protein source. Particularly if you've got sows in your operation, there can be some real value there. Um, Maybe it's not hay, but it's grazed forage, and there can be value there. Um, and a challenge is trying to understand the nutritional profile and what the pig is actually going to be able to extract from that hay or that forage, so that you can formulate the complementary diet to go with that, and think about the physical constraints in the operation. If I'm going to feed hay, do I need to now go buy a tub grinder or equipment to handle the hay? And I think most people that are feeding hay already have that. And it's more a situation of, well, I've got this hay. Can I get some value out of it with pigs? And that's a very different situation than I have a pig operation. I think I want to feed hay. So um, then you got some other investments. So I think nutritionally is the first place to figure out what the pig needs and what you can provide, and then how do you put that diet together?
And then lastly here, as we think about energy and fiber and their practical implications, tell me a bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, basically, we talked about the relationship between energy density and fiber or fat. And most pig production systems are wired to feed pigs to make them grow as fast as they can, to get them out the door so you can get another set of pigs in, to cover the high overhead costs for confinement buildings and the high expense there. And that is certainly reasonable, and it's good welfare for the pigs. I mean, there's not a problem with that system necessarily. But if you're in a much more extensive production system where you don't have those high building costs, those high facility costs, maybe the absolute fastest growth isn't to your advantage. Maybe you can live with a little slower growth and a little cheaper diet that's less energy dense, because you don't have to turn that facility over as quickly. There's also the possibility that if that fiber source is so cheap, it cheapens the diet, and in total, you save money by having a little slower growth. But one has to also worry about the maintenance cost of the pig. So in other words, every day that pig's alive, he's going to take his first cut of energy and nutrients to just keep his body alive. So that's called a maintenance cost. And every day that the pig is here, you have to pay that maintenance cost. Well, at some point, if you keep him here for a long time, you're paying a lot of maintenance costs and not getting a lot of growth out of them. So we also have to think about that as well. The other thing around practical implications is what kind of handling equipment do you have, and what kind of feeding systems available. For instance, if you're all based on milled feed that you're going to run through a flex auger, something like that, well, there's some physical limitations on how bulky that diet can be actually feed through those augers. And so that has nothing to do with nutrition, but it has everything to do about getting feed to the pig. So there's a variety of considerations that one should evaluate before deciding, well, I'm going to feed a lot of fiber or I'm not. And it's not a no-brainer. Yep, everybody does it this way or that way. It's situational.
That wraps up the second episode of our 4-part mini-series on niche swine production. There's a lot for producers and veterinarians to consider when it comes to their goals and resources available for their nutritional plans. A big thank you to Dr. Lee Johnston for joining us and sharing his insights. And of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in. Be sure to come back next week for another timely episode on this niche swine production mini-series. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the Pig X Podcast.
Pig X is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. Pig X, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.